passage. I didn't, so I'm going to catch up with you here and get to Ecclesiastes chapter 3 as well. It's a very well-known passage. Even people that don't know much about the Bible know a little bit about Ecclesiastes chapter 3. It's a rock song in the late 60s by the Byrds, I think, probably helps that a little bit as the memory of the Bible fades. Sometimes the memory of music fades as well, but that song is a pretty popular one. And it really is one of the Bible's most enduring passages. It talks to us about there being a different season of life for everything that goes on among men and women as well. And so this first part here, we're going to go ahead and read verses 1 to 8, and then we're just going to draw from verse 2. It says there, "For everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted. A time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to cast away, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace." It's an interesting passage. I think it presents to us a truth that we're all aware of. And I think it's one that we lose sight of at times as well, that there really is a time for all of these things, which really indicates that all of these things in one way or another can be right or wrong, sometimes based upon circumstances. We're going to focus, though, in this lesson on verse 2, leave the rest for another time, and begin with this idea that there is a time to be born. Birth is one of the most joyous occasions that there is. The birth really of almost any living thing. If you're planting flowers and you're watching day by day and then suddenly you begin to see one, it is a joyous experience. If you're watching a bird's nest in the tree and you see the eggs and you see the mother bird trying to keep them warm, it's a joyous thing when those birds finally break free from that egg. I know we raised some zebra finches back many, many years ago, 25 years ago, and waiting for those zebra finches to come out of those eggs was a moment of great anticipation and reward. But then a human being is perhaps the most marvelous thing at all. 9 months of anticipation, maybe you don't know the entire time to anticipate, but it's incredible when it actually comes to fruition and that baby is born. It's not miraculous. We hear that all the time, the miracle of childbirth, and it's a miracle, and it isn't. It is the most natural thing that there could possibly be, but it is something wonderful still, because God makes it that way. The birth of almost any living thing is cause for rejoicing and hope. There are a lot of things in this world that are living things that we attack, that we don't want to live any longer. Back about 20 years ago, I was on a warpath against weeds in my yard. I hated them, and I tried to destroy them. I did everything that I could. I sprayed them with poison. I would reach down and pluck them up. When I was mowing the grass, I would stop every 3 feet, it seemed, to reach down again and pull something out and start them over again. And I finally realized after a few years of doing that it was an exercise in futility. That there was one me, and there were seemingly thousands of them, and they were winning, and I just declared victory. And I went and drank some lemonade and let them have the yard. And thus it has ever been since then. I tried. We try to kill bacteria. If you're getting your flu shot, you're trying to kill the flu virus. We try to do all those things and kill some living forms that are dangerous to us. We protect other kinds of life. We protect our flowers with fences that try to keep things out that would destroy them. We protect animals with laws, especially pets, but also sometimes livestock. We protect children in mothers' wombs, and we do a great deal in prenatal care in this age in trying to protect that which we recognize as life. And science recognizes the child in the womb as life, really from the point of fertilization. There isn't any doubt among scientists and physicians about whether that's life at that point. Our politicians and philosophers, they want to act as if they don't know what that is. But scientifically, we know exactly what it is and what it will become if it is allowed to survive in the womb. The time to be born is one of rejoicing. We can see that here, and we can see it in other parts of this book as well. It's one of rejoicing, except when that new human life is unwanted, when it is sometimes attacked. There are lots of Bible births, and we could go on and on and on about them. I'll just pick out a few to talk about. One of the, I guess the most interesting is Adam and Eve, because it's a Bible birth, but there's really no birth. They have a birthday, but there's really no birth, and that's very interesting. They skipped that first step. Adam was created by God from the dust of the ground. And again, scientists will tell you that really the human body is really made up of something very much like that, with a composition that is mineral and it's made up of elements of the earth. Eve was created when God saw that Adam was very lonely. And the Bible says he removed one of Adam's ribs and formed a helpmate from that rib. That odd creation of Adam and Eve, never again replicated as far as we know, made God rejoice because mankind was the crowning jewel of creation. Eve was the sparkling brilliance of everything that God had done. And it is so that at the end of the first chapter of Genesis, where creation has been described, that God is able to say that it's good. There are no modifiers there. It's not flowery language like I tend to try to find. It's just, this is good. This is the essence of what it means to be good. There are a lot of other Bible births. Abraham and Sarah, another exceptional case in the book of Genesis. Abraham and Sarah, very old people, about to go to their graves without ever experiencing the joy of having a child until God picked them out to be part of his scheme of salvation, blessing Israel and the world. But in that old age, Sarah found the prospect of childbearing a curious possibility. And at one point, as she's hearing this story that she's going to give birth in less than a year, she laughs. When Abraham and Sarah did not see God's plan moving quickly enough, they did something worse than laugh. They tried to help God out by sending Abraham to a concubine because they didn't see anything wrong with that. But God responded that he didn't really need any help. God knew what he was doing, and God would do what he wanted to do in his time. We talked this morning, we have a particular problem in this age with waiting, with being patient. Abraham and Sarah had the same problem. That was thousands of years ago. It's awfully difficult when you believe something to be good and right and that something should happen when it isn't happening quickly enough. Not to try to speed things up, to accelerate things with your own plans and your own inventions. It's very difficult not to do that when you really think it's the right thing. And moreover, it's very difficult not to question God and to find fault with God when he isn't giving you the answer that you know is the right answer as quickly as you want that answer. Isaac, though, was soon born. And that elderly couple rejoiced because they were parents. And it was God's way. We're going to turn to 1 Samuel chapter 1. Read a little bit there about Hannah in 1 Samuel chapter 1. No mother in the Old Testament is more demonstrative in her joy than Hannah, who was the mother of Samuel. In 1 Samuel chapter 1, we read the story of that birth. There was a certain man of Ramathim Zophim of the hill country of Ephraim, whose name was Elkanah, son of Jehoram. We'll leave the other names for another time. He had two wives. The name of the one was Hannah, the name of the other Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah had none. Now this man used to go up year by year from the city to worship and to sacrifice to the Lord of hosts at Shiloh, where the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were priests to the Lord. On the day when Elkanah sacrificed, he would give portions to Peninnah, his wife, to all her sons and daughters, but to Hannah he gave a double portion because he loved her, though the Lord had closed her womb. And her rival used to provoke her grievously to irritate her because the Lord had closed her womb. So it went on year by year. As often as she went up to the house of the Lord, she used to provoke her. Therefore Hannah wept and would not eat. And Elkanah, her husband, said to her, Hannah, why do you weep and why do you not eat? Why is your heart sad? Am I not more to you than 10 sons? I'm sorry, but I've always read verse 8 and thought, what in the world are you talking about, Elkanah? That is and I may be wrong, and if I'm wrong, I'll apologize, but that is the most absurd thing I think that a man could say to a woman who has not been able to have children. Because the answer isn't recorded here, but I'm quite certain the answer is no, you're not. No. I want a child, and you are not a substitute, especially not when you've got another wife, but let's not go there. Well, after they had eaten and drunk in Shiloh, Hannah rose. Now Eli the priest was sitting on the seat beside the doorpost of the temple of the Lord. She was deeply distressed and prayed to the Lord and wept bitterly. And she vowed a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your servant, and remember me, and not forget your servant, but will give to your servant a son, that I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor shall touch his head. And she continued praying before the Lord. Eli observed her mouth. Hannah was speaking in her heart, only her lips moved, and her voice was not heard. Therefore Eli took her to be a drunken woman. And Eli said to her, How long will you go on being drunk? Put your wine away from you. But Hannah answered, No, my Lord, I am a woman troubled in spirit. I've drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but I've been pouring out my soul before the Lord. Do not regard your servant as a worthless woman, for all along I've been speaking out of my great anxiety and vexation. And Eli answered, Go in peace, and the God of Israel grant your petition that you've made to him. And she said, Let your servant find favor in your eyes. Then the woman went her way and ate, and her face was no longer sad. They rose early in the morning and worshiped before the Lord. Then they went back to their house at Ramah. And Elkanah knew Hannah his wife, and the Lord remembered her. And in due time Hannah conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Samuel, for she said, I have asked for him from the Lord. Hannah's a great story. There's another great story in the New Testament, and it's the story of cousins, Mary and Elizabeth, both singing praises over the births of their own sons, John and Jesus, two men who, along with a few others in Bible history, really changed the course of history. We think of Moses and Abraham and Paul, and maybe a few others, but you add John and Jesus at the top of that list as the forerunner and the Messiah. Great stories of births that are there, and a time of great rejoicing. So precious is life, new human life, even in the soil, so to speak, where God found that the building blocks of life, that God protected it the same that he would protect any other human life. We're still there in our Old Testaments, but in Exodus chapter 21. Exodus chapter 21 and verse 22. In Exodus 21 and 22. This is part of the old law, but it shows God's attitude about that life in the womb. When men strive together and hit a pregnant woman so that her children came out, but there is no harm, the one who hit her shall surely be fined, as the woman's husband shall impose on him. He shall pay as the judges determine. But if there is harm, then you shall pay life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. Now, what am I saying? That this should be the law in our age today? Not necessarily, no. But what I am saying is that if you are a Bible believer, recognize that your God saw life in the womb and treated it as valuable and as something worthy of protection, not destruction. And that wasn't up to the human being to decide this life in the womb is worth protection, this life in the womb it can be destroyed, because it's my right to choose. That isn't present there. It's simply that life should be protected. We live in a country, and Amos, I appreciate your prayer. For a while there, I thought you were looking at my sermon notes, and I was glad you were back there, but you actually took two of my points. You talked about seasons and talked about abortion. I thought, if he goes to my conclusion here, I'll just quit. But and another point, we live in a country where 1 million innocent lives like that are snuffed out every year. And very few people even stop to take notice. I've been preaching for quite a while now, 30 years. And I preached about abortion frequently during that time. And I have sermons, and I look up statistics, and I put in the number of abortions since it was legalized in 1973. And every time I preach it, I have to go back and I have to change that number. I have to increase it sometimes by millions of human beings that have been killed. Abortion has been a legal practice. It is considered by our Supreme Court to be a matter of privacy. That's exactly what our court said ever since 1973. And the most recent count that I found, 61 million abortions since that time. The Bible says there's a time to be born, But what happens is that sometimes people look at that life and decide that it is inconvenient for them. And so they decide to end it. I was listening to the radio this morning, and a song from the 80s came on, a song by Madonna, who was one of the most inappropriately named people on the face of the earth. But she was talking about one of her songs and how it was a feminist rebellion song, and teaching that women have the right to choose what to do with that human being in their bodies. And I'm very familiar with that song, and there is nothing in that song about aborting that baby. She has completely revised her own memory of her own song to try to be consistent with what is popular and common today. This is what people do, is to try to support this abominable practice that we call abortion. The most innocent of innocents, and two pictures on the screen there, and those babies, very young, obviously very new, one probably more than the other. The distance, say 2 months prior to this, when they were still in the womb, they were almost as formed as they are right there. They weighed a little bit less, they were a little bit smaller. They had eyes, and they had fingers and toes. They had a heart that was beating and pumping blood. They had brains. They were capable, just a couple of months before those pictures were made, of feeling pain, which is what abortion causes. In our country, you cannot execute a criminal, a violent rapist, a serial killer in such a way that it causes them any pain, because that's considered to be cruel and unusual. But that right there, I won't even use the terminology, but you're allowed to cause them as much pain as necessary to remove them and to dispose of them. Horror stories in the news recently of doctors performing these procedures, these murders, and keeping the bodies around. And yet, disposing of them seems horrible as well. Abortion is not practiced today because people enjoy it. I don't think anybody enjoys it. But mostly because people fail to exercise self-control beforehand. And so to ease the consequences, they resort to this. I understand that some abortions are the result of other things, but that's a minute percentage. Really, the life is the same either way. Every time a man or woman, a boy or a girl engages in behavior outside of marriage, you're threatening someone else's time to be born. You are subjecting it to what somebody's going to call choice. The time to be born should not be to two young people who aren't married yet. Perhaps two people who don't even love each other and cannot even support themselves. And sadly, that's happening all too often because the respect for marriage and the order of things that we used to consider usual and common just isn't there. Look in your Bibles. Let's go to the New Testament. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. In verse 1, 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 and verse 1, Paul writes, "Finally then, brothers, we ask and urge you in the Lord Jesus, just that as you receive from us how you ought to walk and to please God, just as you are doing, that you do so more and more. For you know what instructions we gave you through the Lord Jesus, for this is the will of God, your sanctification, that you abstain from sexual immorality, that each one of you know how to control his own body in holiness and honor, not in the passion of lust, like the Gentiles who do not know God, that no one transgress and wrong his brother in this matter, because the Lord is an avenger in all these things, as we told you beforehand and solemnly warned you. For God has not called us for impurity, but in holiness. Therefore, whoever disregards this disregards not man, but God, who gives his Holy Spirit to you." Well, God's really very clear about that. And as much as that's connected to a time to be born, it's even more something that we need to respect. There is, though, on the other side of this equation, a time to die. Birth, even under the most ideal of circumstances, sets a human being on an inexorable march toward death. And I realize that is A pretty somber thing to think about on a Sunday evening, but that is the direction that all of us are heading in. In between is life with all of its highs and lows. It's the dash, as they say on the tombstone. We're living in that dash, I guess, between life and birth. We're living in times of successes and failures, of hopes and disappointments, and everything that makes life what it is. Death is the other of man's great curiosities. Where do we come from is one. Where are we going is the other. The Bible really tries to answer that question. Job wondered about that. I'm going to turn to Job chapter 14. Job had very little access to knowledge about this. He didn't have this book that I'm holding in my hand up here. Matter of fact, I don't think any of it had been written when Job lived. He lived in the earliest times, maybe the time of Abraham. And so Job's knowledge about this is extremely limited, but he wondered about it in his agony. In chapter 14, verse 1, he said, "Man who was born of a woman is few of days and full of trouble. He comes out like a flower and withers. He flees like a shadow and continues not. And do you open your eyes on such a one and bring me into judgment with you? Who can bring a clean thing out of an unclean? There is not one. Since his days are determined and the number of his months is with you, and you have appointed his limits that he cannot pass. Look away from him and leave him alone that he may enjoy like a hired hand his day. For there's hope for a tree, if it be cut down, that it will sprout again and that its shoots will not cease. Though its root grow old in the earth, its stump die in the soil. Yet at the scent of water it will bud and put out branches like a young plant. But if a man dies and is laid low, man breathes his last, and where is he? As waters fail from a lake and a river wastes away and dries up, so a man lies down and rises not again. Till the heavens are no more, he will not awake or be roused out of his sleep. Oh, that you would hide me in Sheol, that you would conceal me until your wrath be past, that you would appoint me a set time and remember me. If a man dies, shall he live again? All the days of my service I would wait till my renewal would come." He asked the question, if a man dies, is he going to live again? Job probably thought the answer to that was no. There really wasn't any reason to think anything else. He wanted to be hidden in Sheol, which is the grave, Hades, instead of continuing to live. Happens in the New Testament, a man named Lazarus dies, and people weep over him because he's gone. His sister told Jesus that Jesus could have prevented Lazarus from dying if he had just gotten there sooner. She's right about that. He could have. But he didn't hurry. He did the next best thing. Actually, he did a much better thing. He overturned the sentence of death that life had passed on Lazarus and raised him from the tomb of 4 days. Jesus himself died, and his death gave us a greater insight into man's demise, because his death and resurrection caused the Holy Spirit and the apostles to say more and more about what happens when people die. Everybody. What occurs and what the future holds. And we know a lot more. We don't know everything. We know a lot more than what Job knew. While he was still hanging on the cross and clinging to life, he told that penitent feet beside of him that they would be together in paradise that very day. And so we learn that there's a paradise that is awaiting. He wasn't describing the tomb. They didn't share that cave at all. And it wasn't anything approaching paradise. And although paradise sounds like a pretty good description of heaven, Jesus didn't go to heaven that day either. We know that. He didn't go until he ascended 40 days later. What he was describing was that part of the afterworld into which his spirit went to await his resurrection, just as we would in our lives. I'm going to turn to Luke chapter 16. Luke chapter 16. In his ministry, he describes this place in Luke 16, and this is a chapter with some parables around it and some teaching around it as well. Some people believe this is a parable. If so, it's the only parable that mentions somebody by name. It mentions a person named Lazarus, who is evidently not the same Lazarus that we talked about before, that's more prominent in John's Gospel. But Jesus teaches some things that, whether this is a parable or whether this is a glimpse into reality, it still teaches eternal truth. We learn in Luke 16, verse 19, that there was a rich man who was clothed in purple and fine linen and feasted sumptuously every day. And at his gate was laid a poor man named Lazarus, covered with sores, who desired to be fed with what fell from the rich man's table. Moreover, even the dogs came and licked his sores. The poor man died and was carried by the angels to Abraham's side. The rich man also died and was buried. And in Hades, being in torment, he lifted up his eyes and saw Abraham far off, and Lazarus at his side, and he called out, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus to dip the end of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I'm in anguish in this flame. But Abraham said, Child, remember that you in your lifetime received your good things, and Lazarus in like manner bad things, but now he is comforted here. You're in anguish. Besides all this, between us and you a great chasm has been fixed, in order that those who would pass from here to you may not be able, and none may cross from there to us. And he said, Then I beg you, Father, to send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, so that he may warn them, lest they also come into this place of torment. And Abraham said, They have Moses and the prophets, let them hear them. He said, No, Father Abraham, but if someone goes to them from the dead, they will repent. He said to him, If they do not hear Moses and the prophets, neither will they be convinced if someone should rise from the dead. I'm convinced of whether this is a parable or something that actually happened and Jesus was reporting it, that what he describes is essentially true. There may be some elements of parable there to make a story, but the foundation there is there of what eternity really is like. That sounds like paradise. At least part of it does. One side of the chasm sounds like paradise. Being at Abraham's side sounds like paradise. It was here, I believe, that Jesus was comforted for 3 days until he arose in his resurrection. And it's here that we, people that he calls his brethren, the redeemed, will spend our time between death and resurrection when the trumpet sounds. Where we don't go directly to heaven. We go to a place that is a paradise, and we wait. Death, we're told, is supposedly man's greatest fear. I guess after public speaking, if what we talked about this morning is true. But for the righteous, really, death is not the greatest fear. Maybe dying is, and there's a difference. Dying can be the painful thing. Death itself, if you believe in the Bible and if you are a child of God, really isn't the frightening part. Death itself is a welcome release from pain and decay, from constant trial and temptation that we endure. When Jesus broke through the gates of Hades that could not hold him in that place, he overcame the power of death, making death no longer permanent. Hebrews 2:14 is where I've leafed over to. Hebrews 2:14. The writer says, Since therefore the children share in flesh and blood, he himself, that is Christ, likewise partook of the same things, that through death he might destroy the one who had the power of death, that is the devil, and deliver all those who through fear of death were subject to lifelong slavery. For surely it is not angels that he helps, but he helps the offspring of Abraham. Therefore he had to be made like his brothers in every respect, so that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in the service of God, to make propitiation for the sins of the people. For because he himself has suffered when tempted, he is able to help those who are being tempted. Deliverance, the end of slavery, the abolition of enslavement. The power of death destroyed. The devil handcuffed. No more should we be subject to the mystery of death, because the truth has been revealed. Paradise and heaven are awaiting us. The time to die for the Christian is not something that we necessarily hasten. And I really don't think that there is any among us that necessarily always is looking forward to that point. That time is determined by God. But what I'm trying to say is that it's something that really shouldn't be feared either. Go back to 1 Corinthians chapter 15. And as I stated earlier, the resurrection of Christ was the occasion for the Holy Spirit to reveal a lot of truths that apply to us. In 1 Corinthians 15, verse 20, some of that. It says, But in fact Christ has been raised from the dead, the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep. For as by a man came death, by a man has come also the resurrection of the dead. For as in Adam all die, so also in Christ shall all be made alive. But each in his own order. Christ the first fruits, then at his coming those who belong to Christ. Then comes the end, when he delivers the kingdom to God the Father, after destroying every rule and every authority and power. For he must reign until he has put his enemies under his feet. The last enemy to be destroyed is death. Again in verse 51 of the same chapter. He says, Behold, I tell you a mystery, we shall not all sleep, which means we shall not all die, but we shall all be changed. He says that because there will be some still living when Jesus returns who won't actually die. In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet, for the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised imperishable, and we shall be changed. For this perishable body must put on the imperishable, and this mortal body must put on immortality. When the perishable puts on the imperishable, and the mortal puts on immortality, then shall come to pass the saying that is written, Death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where is your victory? O death, where is your sting? The sting of death is sin. The power of sin is the law. But thanks be to God who gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. Therefore, my beloved brothers, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that in the Lord your labor is not in vain. It speaks about that resurrection body, that immortality. I don't know about you, but when I turned 50, it seemed like my warranty was expired. And all of a sudden, everything just seems to be breaking down. And a lot of you out there turned 50 some time ago and probably had the same experience. That message about this imperishable body, that's appealing. That's appealing. The time to die holds such momentous stakes that we have to always be prepared to face it. Amos read for us Hebrews 9 this morning. Those last couple of verses are toward the end of that chapter, verses 27 and 28. It is appointed for men to die once, but after this, the judgment. The time to die promises a future in those mansions that Jesus went to prepare for us. That is a place in his Father's house, a room in the mansion that belongs to God. That song about when this life is over, wanting a gold mansion that's silver lined. I've always kind of struggled with that song. But I don't struggle with the idea of a room in my Father's house. That appeals to me. And that's what happens on the other side of a time to die. There's a time to be born and a time to die, generally separated by about 80 years. For some, much less. For some, a little bit more. But what we do with those few vapors of time really determines how we spend our eternity. Death leads to paradise for the redeemed, but to torment for those who do not know God or do not obey the gospel, as Paul wrote in 2 Thessalonians chapter 1. Our invitation song this evening, number 320, will Jesus find us watching, waiting and watching when he comes. Not just sitting around waiting for it to happen, but being prepared for him to return. I pray that you will be prepared when Jesus returns. If this night, at this moment, at 6:49 on Sunday evening, you're not ready, let me encourage you to make yourself ready in the next few moments and not to wait a long longer. To be baptized into Christ, if such you've never done, or to repent and to return to Jesus if you want to. Make yourself ready before the sun goes down on this day. Make sure you're ready if Jesus should return, if your soul is required of you this day. If you need to, would you come as we stand together and sing the song of encouragement?